Welcome to Speaking Holistically, the podcast that explores the power of alternative medicine, natural healing, and homeopathic solutions to help you achieve true wellness. Each week, Dr. Jen and Amy G dive into the world of holistic health, discussing researched, time-tested remedies with expert insights from Dr. Jen, as well as real-life stories from patients to empower you to take charge of your health. So if you're ready to embrace a more natural path to wellness, let's start speaking holistically, because true healing begins from within. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Speaking Holistically. I'm your co-host, Amy G. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Dr. Jen, and we're doing a common health concerns episode today on yeast infections.
Yep, and not just for women. So
what other creature gets yeast infections?
Men get yeast infections as well. They just don't have the same symptoms. And so
What?
we're going to get into this. Yeah, we're going to get into this. And a lot of the yeast infections that women are getting are actually being given to them by their partners.
What?
Yep. So it's the long forgotten issue of being intimate with somebody who has either alcohol or sugar cravings or lots of carbs, and they themselves have yeast infections, and then they're passing it over to their female counterpart. Not always, but definitely an issue.
That's crazy. I have a friend of mine. I've never had yeast infection. I only hear horror stories from women who've had them. They sound god awful, but I have a friend who she just gets them all the time, and she's like miserable, and she's like, oh my God, I got another yeast infection. And I'm like, oh, so she could potentially be getting them from her partner. Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, wow. Let's get into this. I'm in shock.
We're gonna back up a little bit, okay? So what I want to explain is that usually the men in their lives, or it could be women, but their partner usually has not a super clean diet. They do excessive alcohol, and that could also be that they do 1 or 2 beverages a day, like in the evening. So some people don't think that's excessive, but it can be if you're growing yeast, because you're just feeding the beast at that point. So I had a gentleman come in, his son had referred him, and he'd had chronic yeast infections or chronic infections in his sinuses. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
He had been on multiple antibiotics, literally probably 7 to 8 of them a year.
Oh my God.
7 to 8 times a year. So his doctor finally recommended sinus surgery. So he said, fine, I can't take this anymore. He did sinus surgery. He was fine for the first 3 days, and then full-blown sinus infection again, and could not figure out what was going on. So his son, like I said, referred him in. I started seeing him. I told him it was yeast in the sinuses. He thought I was insane. I said, that's fine. You can think I'm insane. Let's just see how this goes. The proof is in the pudding, okay? So we went ahead and I basically took him. I did hardcore yeast like detox for him. And some people, depending on where they're at, I might not do quite as much, or if I know that they're going to completely fail at it, then we'll do it not including fruit. But I take them off of dairy, sugar, because those both together are just the great fire to feed any kind of yeast.
Yeah.
So I took them off dairy, off sugar, off bread with any kind of yeast in it. Even some tortillas have yeast, even though they don't rise. Took them off of all fruit as well, because it was so bad. So anything that was even carbohydrate at all, basically, he was on meat and vegetables.
I was going to say, what was this man eating? Just meat and vegetables, the only thing I could think of.
He was so desperate. He was like, I'll do anything. I'm so sick of this. And I'm like, that's great. We're finally to the point that you need to be so we can get somewhere with it. So we did that. I saw him weekly, and he was getting better and better and better. And week 4, he came in and full-blown sinus infection again. And I said, what did you do? What did you do? And he was like, nothing. And he was from Britain. He was like, I haven't had any crumpets. I haven't had any tea with milk. Like he was all upset with me. And I said, dude, something had to have happened. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying to think of it. And I said, how often are you intimate with your wife? And he said, not very often. And I said, did you, between last visit and this visit? And he said, yes. I said, bring in your wife. So he brought in his wife, and she had a history of yeast infections. But once again, hers were not generally vaginally, they were in her sinuses. So I would say only about 10% of the patients I've seen that are women, they've never had a vaginal yeast infection. They get them in their sinuses thinking they're a sinus infection or allergies.
Oh my God, real 10%?
Mm-hmm. But 90% of the women get them vaginally. And so we see all these stupid commercials with women running through the flowers, like, talking about yeast infections. and the drugs that you can take for them. And they never talk about men. They never discuss that men can get them too. Just because
I
you don't
mean,
have a
I just learned
vagina.
that today.
So, but just because you don't have a vagina doesn't mean you can't get a yeast infection. It's just that you're going to get different symptoms. And usually it's exhaustion, brain fog, sinus troubles of some sort, whether you want to call it allergies or a sinus infection that's chronically, that just doesn't go away. And the biggest thing to do too is if you have a drink of beer or a sip of wine, and within a couple of sips, your nose gets stuffy, it's absolutely yeast.
Oh, that's a good tip for people. Wow.
So they're not going to want that, because at the end of that, they're going to want to order the dessert too. And they're, dang it,
Mm.
So there's definitely things that you can do, and it's not super painful. But as far as yeast goes, I usually use oregano or a dry form of ADP by Biotics Research, which I absolutely love because it's so much more gentle than oregano oil on the stomach. But it's funny because oregano is naturally antifungal, anti-parasitic, antibacterial, and antiviral. So I halfway joke, if you don't know what it is, throw some oregano at it, it'll probably kill it. Um, but the thing about it is it does kill the bacteria in the gut, kind of good and bad.
Mm.
But it doesn't have a secondary yeast infection side effect like you would if you were to take like an antibiotic, obviously, because it's going to end up killing all that. So
Yeah.
I usually do ADP 1 to 3 of them a day, just depending on the person, how much is going on, everything. But then we also have to make sure there's plenty of water and good fiber as far as like vegetables and stuff to kind of push the die off through, so they don't get toxic from just killing the yeast, but then not getting it out of the system.
Oh, okay.
Right?
That's a great tip.
And sometimes I'll add Spanish black radish from standard process because that mechanically works like a broom and sweeps out the rugae or the intestinal folds. And it also is high in sulfur, so it increases the liver detox pathway functioning. So ADP a couple of times a day. Sometimes I'll tell people, especially just if you can, take it on an empty stomach, right, 15 minutes before you eat, even an hour before you eat. I don't care. Just get it in there so it can kill off whatever it needs to kill off. And then if women are having vaginal symptoms, so I'm not a huge fan of douching, especially I would never buy one from the store and do it that way. But they do have the hot water bottles that have a hose on it. It has a douche and enema attachment as well as just a regular hot water bottle. And so I'll have women do half apple cider vinegar or work their way up to half apple cider vinegar and half stove warmed distilled water. Do not put it in the microwave, okay? Because you don't want it to get too hot, and that is the last place you want to burn. So when you check the water temperature, put your finger in the pot, and it should be about temperature, like you shouldn't be able to feel it. It should be about the same temperature as your body. And then pour half of the bag full of apple cider vinegar and the other half with distilled water. And then you can hook it up over your shower head and use the douche attachment. And there's a little clamp so you can start it and stop it or whatever you need to do. And most women get literally instant relief from this. So they're not running to the doctors and getting Monistat and all this other stuff. You can do it every day. You could do it twice a day because all we're doing is acidifying the vaginal tract, and the vaginal tract should be acidic to begin with. So this is just getting the pH back to the side that it needs to be. And then once the symptoms start to subside, you can go every other day, then you could go twice a week, then you could do once a week or however often you need to do it to keep that acidity, the pH of the vagina balanced. Generally, women don't need them longer than 2 weeks, and sometimes a couple of days is enough. So just kind of keep track of that. So doing the ADP for a couple of weeks, making sure the diet is cleaned up, no sugar, no dairy especially. And then after we're done with the ADP, then I'll usually give a probiotic specifically for women, which helps with their vaginal flora, which is ProbioMed or ProbioMed, depending on who you are and how you want to say it. It's ProbioMed Women from Designs for Health. I love that probiotic because it has all of the things that women need, and women generally notice a difference immediately. So here's the thing though. I don't give oregano at the same time I give a probiotic because I'm not going to kill all the bacteria and then try to recolonize and then kill all the bacteria. So I generally will do just ADP or oregano for the first 3 weeks or whatever, and then start a month worth of the ProbioMed Women's, which is like 1 a day for 30 days or 2 a day for 30 days. At the same time though, however, your husband, partner, whatever, needs to be treated as well. Giving them ADP or oregano at the same intervals 2 or 3 times a day is going to be really important. Obviously, they're not going to be douching. So, but also you can acidify their digestive tract, which is going to change things as well with using apple cider vinegar capsules or tablets if they're having digestive issues. So, but generally the ADP is enough. Now, what's interesting, Amy, is that yeast infections, it's a pH imbalance, basically. Things have gotten off in the system and not just vaginally. If you're having it vaginally, you're having it digestively too. But the other thing is a lot of women will get bacterial vaginosis or bacterial vaginitis. And it's kind of the same thing as getting a yeast infection. It's not the same thing because you've got a bacterial overgrowth as opposed to a yeast overgrowth, but it's basically the same treatment. The only thing I do different with the bacterial vaginosis or vaginitis is I add an immune boost, which is a product that I formulated, and it works really, really well. There's 11 different supplements in it. It works well for a lot of different immune system issues, but these women generally don't have to go on antibiotics, even though their OBGYN tells them that's the only way you can get rid of it is you have to take an antibiotic. I'm like, well, I mean, 23 years of experience in practice has told me otherwise. So, and not saying don't ever do the antibiotic. I'm not telling you, I'm not with you. I'm not your physician. You know, that's the caveat. I always want to explain that you do what you have to do with where you're at, but there are generally other ways to handle it besides getting a secondary yeast infection from the bacterial infection that you had because you took an antibiotic. So it's this hamster wheel that's hard to get off of for sure. So yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, kind of all because of the same thing, but end up with different results as far as the symptomatology goes. So if you have bacterial vaginosis, vaginitis, that's the exact same thing that you want to do with your partner, spouse, or whatever, is you want to make sure that you're giving them the immune boost as well, giving them the oregano, do the same treatment that you're giving yourself, and the same food restrictions, really. Yeah. And plenty of water to flush it all out. And like I said, if you feel more toxic when you start taking that, then add some Spanish black radish and that'll help with the detoxification.
Wow.
But don't forget your partner, because they'll have it low grade and then you get it again. You're like, I get them all year long. I get them every month. I get them every 3 weeks or whatever. And it's like, well, it's not that you're getting them every 3 weeks. It's that it's not completely going away. And if yours is going away, you're getting recolonized by the intimacy with your partner.
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating to me. Obviously, the first thing is that men can get yeast infections. That blew my mind. But then the passing between the partners I didn't even know that could happen. I just didn't. Yeah, that's just very surprising.
Well, and then the gentleman that had that, we treated his wife and we treated him together at the same time, and he was great. I mean, literally, he was perfect. He was like, I can't even believe this. This is amazing. And he was able to take care of it. So if his diet got out of control, if he was having cocktails at night and tea and crumpets in the morning and all that stuff, you could start getting out of control. And he started feeling it in his sinuses again. And it was like, well, back off before it gets worse, that sort of thing. And then he has the tools of what to do for it.
Yeah, kind of what to combat it with when it happens. Yeah. Wow. Geez, I got my mind blown several times during this episode. I think I'm not alone in that. I guarantee our listeners are like
wait, what? Well, and then it's also hard for the women to say, hey, it's actually you, right? And their husbands are like, no, it's not me, that sort of thing. And so that's the other thing is, ladies, if you think it's your partner, like maybe communicate it in a way that isn't criticizing, because a lot of men take things a lot more personal than women do. And not necessarily, but they do. If you kind of come at them a little bit, they have a tendency to posture, well, because they don't want to be blamed for something that they don't think that they can even get. I mean, no one's told them. I mean, if you didn't know that men could get yeast infections in their sinuses, or anywhere, it's really systemic, because it's really part of the mucous membranes, right? So you can have yeast in your gut, yeast in your sinuses, yeast in your ears. I mean, how many people are like, oh my God, my ears itch all the time?
And your tongue too, right?
Mm-hmm, you can get thrush, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all the mucous membranes. But I mean, some people come in, they're just constantly itching their ears. And I'm like, yeah, you've got yeast in your ears. But they keep getting antibiotic drops. And it's like, well, that's causing a secondary yeast infection potentially. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. So
wow, this was a fascinating episode. I'm kind of speechless. Like, I'm really surprised. I learned a lot in this. And I think even for women having to approach their husband or their boyfriend, their partner, and say, hey, it might be you passing this to me. I think just explaining it and saying it's just an imbalance.
It's not you, it's me.
But I mean, if you make it like, it's not like this has nothing to do with their performance in the bedroom or anything. It has to do with the balance in their system. So I think that's a pretty easy message to deliver if you don't say it.
But if you've got somebody who drinks alcohol every night, has 3 or 4 beers a night, and they're not interested in changing their diet, then what do you do? So it's one of those things like, hey, baby, I need you to do this for me. You know, can you do this for me? As opposed to you're the problem. So a lot of times, well, I mean, really, it's how you deliver that message, right? So that's exactly it. So you don't want them to be defensive and think that it's their fault. And maybe their yeast went away, and then the yeast was given to the partner, and then, you know, and it just keeps hand over fist, like handing it to them. So
yeah.
You know, but yeah, sinuses. Tell you what, you eat anything sugary, drink any wine, any beer, anything fermented like that. Sometimes even too much kombucha can do that to the gut.
Oh, wow.
Well, and we're only supposed to be eating a lot of those fermented foods, an ounce or 2 at a time. People are buying a 16-ounce kombucha, and then we're like, well, it's healthy for you. I'm like, well, more is not necessarily better. So just paying attention to that. What do your sinuses feel like when you have dairy or when you have sugar or when you have any alcohol? And a lot of people go, oh yeah, my sinuses get super stuffy with the first couple of sips of alcohol. I'm like, then you know what you're contending with.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just a great tip for people to like pay attention to that. You know, is that how your body reacts? Then you know you got something to deal with. And so, and again, I didn't even know it could be in the sinuses. Like I just always, at least for me, my mind just goes to vaginal yeast infections and women only. So
running through fields of flowers. Well, my daughter, one time we went to a restaurant and they didn't ask us, it was part of the kids' meals or whatever, I guess they brought out Sundays. And I think I've told the story, but my daughter, when they were passing them out, and I was like, oh my gosh, they didn't ask, because I don't feed my kids a lot. Well, especially when they were little, they didn't really get any sugar.
Right.
And we didn't do a lot of treats and stuff like that, but we also didn't have to contend with illnesses really like everybody else. They'd get a little something, it was over within 12 to 24 hours. It wasn't anything major.
Yeah.
So they brought out these sundaes and my daughter's like, no, thank you. And she was 5 and she's like our carb addict, right? So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is wrong with her then, you know? And so I let the kids have the sundaes because I wasn't about to have a woman come out with a tray of sundaes. The kids are like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, no, take them away, you know? So I'm not gonna be that parent. I was like, you can be if you want to, I'm just not. So I was like, they're gonna end up with therapy for other reasons for sure. So I was like, that's not the hill I'm gonna die on. So I let them have it. And my daughter was like, no, thank you. And after the waitress, the server left, I said, so why? I'm just curious as to why you said no to it. And she said, my nose is a little bit stuffy and I just didn't want to get sick. And I'm like, oh, self-regulation. Oh my gosh. If I do nothing else as a parent, like, thank God my kids can self-regulate. And not all the time, we're not perfect, but that was huge for a 5-year-old to say no to a sundae when she never gets one. So, but she knew her body and she just backed off. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. So as an adult, you get a little stuffy. Don't just keep leaning into the bottle. Back off. Take some oregano.
You told me when she was 3 years old, she said, my ears hurt. I need an adjustment. And then she threw herself on the bed. And I'll never forget that because I just thought, oh my God, she's so tiny and she understands there's an issue with her. So she's been hyper aware of her body like from day one.
Well, and I did that with my kids. Like I want them to take, inventory. I don't want them to be a hypochondriac, but I want them to take inventory. Like, okay, if this feels like this, I need to do this before it gets too far down the path. Like it's easier to turn around a quarter of a mile into an issue as opposed to 72 miles into an issue. You know what I mean? And then people are like, why is it taking so long? I'm like, well, you let it get that far. So, right. My kids are absolutely like that for sure. They notice things immediately and will shift for sure. So it's great, but they're really never sick because they do self-regulate like that and then figure out exactly what they need to do for themselves.
Yeah. No, they're dialed in. That's for sure. Well, thank you, Dr. Jen. This has been another episode of Speaking Holistically. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you haven't joined our school community, please do so. Our link will be in the show notes below. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
That wraps up another episode of Speaking Holistically. Thank you for listening. We hope today's conversation gave you new insights and inspiration to take charge of your health. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, be sure and join the Speaking Holistically School community by clicking the link in the show notes. There, you'll get access to daily podcast episodes, weekly live Q&As, educational content, and so much more. You can also connect with us on our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, be well, stay curious, and keep speaking holistically.